Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Teaching and Learning Center's first official faculty programming as part of the Online Faculty Fellow Program for 2021 and 2022. Today, we'll be presenting a demo on digital innovation, emerging technologies, and emerging crimes. My name is Dr. Michelle Strah, and I'm actually the Online Faculty Fellow for 2021 and 2022. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for having me. At John Jay, I'm also a visiting scholar in the Center for International Human Rights. My focus and specialty is in artificial intelligence and ethics, and I'm also an adjunct professor in the International Criminal Justice Program, both the BA and MA programs. So a little bit about my background. My doctorate was in applied psycholinguistics. I focused in looking at the intersection of technology and extremist violence from a historical perspective, and looking at the impact of technology in ways knowledge is formed. After my doctoral research, I went into the military. I was both in the US Navy and the United States Army. I was discharged as a severely disabled veteran. And in my post-military career, I worked in experience design and innovation, continuing my work in counterterrorism, but also focused in some of the applications in the civilian world. So I did design all the way from facilities to mobile devices to warehouse systems for the National Intrepid Center of Excellence in Bethesda, Maryland, specifically targeted to severely disabled veterans with traumatic brain injury. Worked at Microsoft as in the national cloud teams, looking at deploying emerging technologies around the world to counter cybercrime with the Digital Crimes Unit. Also worked at NBC Universal in looking at information governance and security, specifically around the problems of disinformation, and also specialized in workforce development programs, incorporating expanded skill sets into cyber security and cybercrime prevention, and large scale workforce development programs, multi-site around the world, but really leveraging experience, information, and data literacy competencies for the cybersecurity and cybercrime fields. So I started here at John Jay in 2018. I myself, as I noted, I'm a severely disabled veteran, so a lot of what we're going to see actually reflects my own experience, but my research has focused not only in innovation, but also how innovation impacts criminal behavior, how they adopt innovative models, as well as innovations in law enforcement, national security, and criminal justice. So specifically, my most recent research has been in the field of disinformation, emerging forms of cybercrime, cyber warfare, and the terror crime nexus there, as well as the rise of the extreme right wing and the transnational links there, and how that plays out as domestic terrorism, both in the US and Europe, and what that means for the criminal justice curriculum today, specifically looking at some of the workforce needs for law enforcement and national security professionals, and what we can do to kind of close the gap with the ways, in some ways, criminals are out innovating some of our tools and methods. So with that background, I was asked by Rosemary Barbaret and Gohar Petrosian in the ICJ program to develop a special topics course, ICJ 380, in disinformation and cybercrime. So I incubated that with the intent of launching it in fall 2020, and really kind of trying to pull in some of the strategic goals that we've outlined here at John Jay around quantitative literacy, active learning, research-based writing across courses, open educational zero-cost resources, and then, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about workforce development, and as well as something very near and dear to my heart, accessibility. Obviously, with COVID-19, everything kind of went out the window for a while. So the course was not launched in fall 2020, but was slated to launch in spring 2021. So in that time frame, I was able to prototype the course, which was originally designed to be in person, to meet the fully asynchronous modality that it was going to be launched as. So that caused me to rethink some of my initial assumptions, but also to hone them to meet that modality. And I was able to reflect as well on some ways to really kind of bring to bear some critical examination of a culturally responsive and anti-racist curriculum, which obviously was a response to the murder of George Floyd, and some of our thinking on that at the Center for International Human Rights. But the fully asynchronous modality really caused me to really hone in on gamification and visual sociology and criminology as going to be important ways to promote experiential learning and online organizational behavior. Knowing that there was going to be a little bit of a gap in perhaps student background in this, I wanted to take some of the challenges around how extremist groups and some cybercrime groups take advantage of online gaming platforms, but also model their structures in ways that we think of as gameplay, and really give students an opportunity to think about that. The approach I took in doing this was universal design. So taking, to boil this down, taking multiple means of engagement, multiple means of delivering content, and multiple means of expression. So students have a choice in how they engage with the course. My role is to present content in as many modalities as possible, and to give students the opportunity to express themselves in many ways, as many as possible. Like I said, some of this is based on my own experience and challenges and disabilities. I, for one, am very challenged by more traditional or enterprise knowledge platforms, but I also wanted to honor and address the student experience and increased need for accessibility and accommodations, especially due to COVID-19. Their experience with acute disabilities, families, disabilities, and chronic acquired disabilities, which I know COVID-19 is changing the script around that quite a bit. But also experience design goes a little bit beyond the way we think about this in the educational sector as universal design for learning, by kind of trying to anticipate needs in built environments, both digital and physical. So this can be anything from architecture, facilities, broadband, mobility, food, devices, lighting, emotion, cognitive load. And obviously the events of January 6, 2021 really brought a lot to bear on this, not only because I had to reinvent the last third of the syllabus to address that, but also because it really had its own, was really a flashpoint around, some of it was very traumatic for a lot of Americans to witness that, but it really forced us to bring, how we think about online, how people interpret, conspiracy theories, emotion, incitement to violence within that context. So some of the principles you're going to see during the demo are extended universal design for learning principles. So I have a few here that are kind of beyond the standard, but looking for an online experience that is equitable, flexible, simple, intuitive, perceptible. So regardless of the ambient conditions, which is very difficult to predict, or the user's sensory abilities, has to have a high tolerance for error to avoid that, frustration if you're not clicking in the right box. Low effort, not just physically, and I'm someone who uses alternative input devices, but also in terms of bandwidth, cost, user mobility, not just in terms of physical access, but regardless of device they may be using on in multiple locations, and certainly student privacy and safety, given the challenging materials we were going to look at. The student attributes, what they brought, when I looked at their profile, was 30 students were registered. And 28 completed the course. That's a lot of people for an asynchronous online course. So that influenced my thinking around the assignments, as well as how we were going to what type of interaction they were going to be able to get from me as well. 93% of the students identified as female, 7% as male, 97% were first-generation college students, 97% have a heritage language other than English, which is also my own experience. 100% were employed, full or part-time, outside of full-time coursework, so in various essential worker capacities. 80% are first or second generation immigrants from Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. 60% were ICJ students, and 10% were from the CUNY Justice Academy. One thing we did that was a little bit innovative for the launch of this course was I requested that all prerequisites be waived. So no technical prerequisites, and none of the standard ICJ, political science, or English prerequisites that are normally at the 300 course level. Part of that was to get the broadest representation of students across John Jay. The course has a multidisciplinary approach, so I wanted to open it up, but I was also curious to see who was going to be interested in a course like this. Students had previous to this said to me, as well as the students who took this course, that there's sometimes a barrier for students to take cybercrime courses if there's a lot of technical prerequisites. Obviously, for some disciplines like digital forensics, that's very important to have those technical prerequisites. But there are students either felt that cybercrime or online extremist behavior or cyber terrorism was too abstract to them, or they felt that they were intimidated by the subject matter because they felt they needed a lot of programming expertise. Only 10% of the students enrolled in this course were concurrently pursuing computer science or cybercrime coursework, or minors. So that impacted, kind of my, kind of the technical knowledge that I shared with the students during the course. Given all of this, my decision then was to sort of flip the script on online extremism and cybercrime, which often use online gaming as a means of communications, means of funding, and flip the script and say, okay, we're gonna outgame the gamers through gamification. So this in online gaming, one of the ways to create a sense of unity amongst geographically distributed and a lot of times anonymous users or players is through world building. So actually building a virtual and fictional world that employs a lot of skills around affective design. So in terms of incorporating emotion, in terms of what we used to call in the military unit and task cohesion, affinity and task-based community building, and group behavior, incorporating information and digital literacy skills throughout the course, not only in the modules where we're specifically talking about this, but also as a way to scaffold these skills throughout, and leveraging open educational and zero cost resources. This also allowed us to address very explicitly a critical examination of race, gender, and hate speech in online subcultures, which is actually a huge problem for gaming and online communities. And the course itself was driven by horizontal and peer-driven learning, much in the same way that gaming platforms are, to really promote mastery and self-efficacy, promote student autonomy and agency. And my role then shifted very much. So rather than being the transmitter of knowledge or a single point of failure in a sense, I took on a role as curator, or what we see in massive multiplayer online role-playing games as the lead, or the game lead or game master. So a very different hierarchy than what we're used to in a traditional classroom. So I'm going to right now switch over actually to the course itself. So this actually, what you're seeing here is actually the homepage of the course. So this has all of the standard elements that a typical course would have: syllabus, announcements, assignments, grading, resources, how to find me. Students can find me on a Calendly link, so it's one click, not a lot of friction there. I encourage them to follow me on social media, both Twitter and Instagram, and communicate with me there. This information was actually mirrored in Blackboard in the more traditional hierarchical format, so that students, regardless of where they were, whether in our course platform, or what I anticipated was that they were going to be seeing other courses in Blackboard, they would have reminders and the announcements and content and assignments in both. So, they didn't have to worry that, they were going to be missing something. The course itself, as I said, was organized around a fictional world of disinformation, where they were going to be navigating this throughout the semester. So starting here, and then we navigate all the way over to the end of the semester. So it gives almost kind of like these mini islands or modules of knowledge, but allows us to track our progress as we go through this. So it's almost like each week then was a stopover in one of these fictional countries as we were, or states, I guess, as we're going through this. So it proceeded, as a narrative through this. So part of the way to do this was to start off immediately with introductions. So team introductions was a way to build an identity around the concept of misinformation and disinformation. So we started with kind of a level setting about what is this, and giving them a sense of the different elements that we were going to look at throughout the semester, but also starting with a quiz to orient them to where do they feel they are in this. In terms of how did they introduce themselves, I actually started off here on the left by role modeling myself as somebody who works within who exists online. So I brought up, for example, some TikToks that I read, some movies that I see, and part of that was to give them a sense of me as a digital citizen and not just as somebody who's, the professor who's got a, very official background. Then that actually became then sort of our introduction to each other as a member of a team, but introduced a visual language as opposed to, very hierarchical or text-based languages. The first couple weeks of the semester were very much more, bringing kind of a level set to the content. So in terms of, what is the typology of disinformation in both transnational and international crimes, presenting legal and technical concepts, as well as some of the historical concepts, and using open source texts, with selected chapters to kind of level set students to, what is the intellectual framework of this. Then we had also, an introduction to the international and domestic regulatory frameworks for disinformation. And again, because the student body that both took the course in the fall, in the spring, and is taking it now, come from a very wide variety of backgrounds and majors, I couldn't assume that some of the international or regulatory frameworks around the transnational criminal aspects of this, the international crimes, or the counterterrorism field were actually a given. So that was presented there almost as a way to level set and give everybody a framework for analysis. For all of the weeks, the students have lectures in a PDF / PowerPoint format, some of which we go over in class. Also lecture videos that have, were closed caption. So I've taught the course both now asynchronously and in person. So with the asynchronous course, this was their way to interact with me. For the in-person course, this is a backup, so to give students flexibility if they have to miss class due to illness or family issues, but also because right now, we're all teaching with a mask on. So that's, I didn't want to disadvantage students who may have difficulty understanding me with a mask on, or, may have English, may not be their heritage language. So a way to, or, just may want to review materials a little more. So multiple ways to engage. The other option that they have with this platform, Milanote, is the students can export the board into multiple formats. So whatever works for them. PDF as an image, Word document, plain text. So if they're using other types of screen readers, or even, if they want to interact with this away from their desktop, they want to interact with it on their iPad, or want to listen to the content, they can do that. They also have the ability, when searching this, the search actually is quite robust. So if a student can't remember where something is, they can just type the word such as Philippines or, weapons, and it'll find it regardless of the board. So it's much more intuitive in terms of student navigation. As we moved on, I started to give students more and more ownership of the content. So by the time we got to module 4 and we're starting to look at online trafficking per se, this is where I started introducing their group projects. So in addition to the learning objectives, which are always presented, I also presented the outline for their group project. But before I get to that, I want to discuss a little bit about how we went through some of the materials. So students were presented with a wide variety of not only peer-reviewed academic research, but also some gray literature, as we call it, from reputable sources, where they were learning then themselves what was appropriate information. So part of this is modeling for them what are some sources that they can use themselves, both from a standpoint of gray literature, from news, from peer-reviewed articles and data, giving them some video options, giving them, for example, introduction to actual data sets where we're going to start some data analysis, but a wide variety of materials, and you'll see soon, including Twitter hashtags. So in this particular group project, I'm going to pull this up here for you. The assignment that was given to the students was actually to engage with a Twitter hashtag. So this is a hashtag that was developed by Dr. Erin Thompson, and in her hashtag, bad fake of the day, she actually has collected a really interesting set of actually fake art. So whether it's illegally obtained antiquities or counterfeit. So in order for the students to start to really kind of get hands-on with how do we investigate cybercrime, how do we start looking at this visually from an open source perspective, I wanted them to gain practice in this. So in terms of open source investigations, visual sociology, and how to code and classify this, but to do so safely. So rather than send them off on their own to go find this, and put themselves in a position where they may be, having to navigate some unsavory portions of the internet, we use Dr. Thompson's hashtag and frame that within kind of a novel, what was novel for them, a novel approach in visual sociology. So they were given, very clear instructions in terms of what they were going to have to do in creating their own board in Milanote, but also, that this was exploratory. There wasn't kind of a right answer to this, but really wanted them to know what right looks like. In doing so, I actually gave them an example from the previous semester so that they could see what right looks like. And then they were given in-class time to work on this, as well as working with their peers, either synchronously or asynchronously, whatever worked for them. So they're able to collaborate within the platform, both synchronously and asynchronously, or use, whatever, worked out best for the teams. And what was very interesting in this is they actually, and this is actually an example of a group work, is they actually incorporated Dr. Thompson as a quote unquote virtual character within their world. And they analyzed, which I thought was ingenious. So their dialogue wasn't just with me as the professor, but with the team and Dr. Thompson. So each individual within this particular project, and they created their graphics in Canva, had their own graphics. So they started in this group, they organized it by team member. So they started with this particular team member who was able to incorporate her own personal experience at the Metropolitan Museum and use that as part of her criteria for analyzing some of these counterfeit items. Then we had, as part of their narrative, okay, so then we introduced their second person. Don't worry, there's more of where this came from. And finally, their third member. So what I thought was really ingenious about the way they did this is they also were able to incorporate, comparisons to, this is what a, legitimate object would look like, and compare pricing as well as some of the language. They did a really great job in focusing on some of the linguistic aspects of degree adverbs and what that meant here, as well as some of the visual and historical markers that made a big difference. But what was very interesting was the students also had to think themselves about how not just the objects that they were analyzing, but their experience of what this meant for them to have to organize information in this way, which for all of them was actually quite new. So as we went through the course, each of the items or modules, it did have some things in common. So you'll see up here, there was the breadcrumbs so students could follow the organization. They had a task list in the upper left-hand corner, so that was kind of standard. Milanote actually provides reminders for them, both through the browser as well as if they chose to download the app, they could, but they weren't required to. And also, using the different boards to navigate so that, they didn't have to find information was shared with them. So again, using a variety of materials from as we hear in the cryptocurrency case studies, we actually did some kind of live analysis. Not only this one, these come from the Poland's CSERT, but also looked specifically at how this was done on Instagram with cryptocurrency fraud, as well as Twitter, so they could kind of see how this played out live. But comparing this with actual indictments as well as peer-reviewed articles to really kind of help them pull together various sources for this. When we got to this part of module 6, this one actually has much more kind of, so we start to incorporate a lot more hands-on research and open educational resources. So beyond the information presented, so in this particular module, we're looking at reverse engineering propaganda, investigative journalism, and the specific role journalists play. And in this module, we had a case study of the Philippines. We also then did a deep dive into some of the research and ethical considerations. So not only in terms of, what is ethical from the standpoint of open source intelligence, but additional resources for them to go through in this, but also what are some of the ways to approach this in especially with really large data sets. So it's not conceivable for undergraduates to try to grasp a lot of this or to try to perhaps, do some huge big data analysis, but they were provided, with data sets that are publicly available, that have been made available by the Oxford Internet Institute, by Graphical Labs, by the Citizen Lab, as well as the Atlantic Council, looking at ways to incorporate crisis informatics in this, as well as some of the recent databases and work on right-wing terrorism, and some data sources around the Capitol siege. And so part of this is to introduce students to the fact that there is data out there that they can start using to go beyond kind of, some individual cases. And then this becomes a springboard then almost for the rest of the course, because this is something that they're going to keep coming back to, as you'll see in some of their subsequent assignments. So it's really starting to incorporate some of that data literacy along with the information literacy. So to that end, I'm going to go over now their second group project. And this one came from the previous semester, where they were asked to look at computational propaganda and political elections. So done in the students in this one weren't assigned to be part of a group, but they were actually able to choose what group they wanted to be in. So these were different country case studies. So it gave students some agency there, but again, they were given a very kind of solid framework for how to proceed with this, both in terms of what criminological theory I wanted them to incorporate, and what their sample questions were to look at each of the elements in routine activities theory, as a way to give them a very solid foundation to analyze what can seem like very, very chaotic experiences, especially around political elections, and to kind of depoliticize this and to start to look at it from a data-driven standpoint. So what was exciting about this was their the case studies that they did come up with. In this one, this was the one that really this was the favorite of all the students. So these three students had actually selected the Uganda 2021 elections, and what really was fascinating about this was the way they organized around the criminological theory, and then were able to effectively communicate to the class what had actually gone on between the political parties, who were the offenders, their motivations, and what was exciting for the class was that nobody was familiar with this case study whatsoever. And so it was new, and there was a lot of excitement that they were able to learn about this from other students. And what I was particularly excited about was that all the teams started to incorporate data and analytics in their presentations. So starting to look at this not simply as, who was my favorite candidate, but finding ways to look at this from a standpoint of quantitative literacy. So that was actually very effective. The other aspect of this that was very effective here was, it was at this point in the semester, so this was our 8th week in the semester, where I really at this point started to stand back, and you can see I'm zooming out here because I want you to see the amount of dialogue that the students are having with each other. All of these comments that you see are the students talking with each other, not me. My role at this point in the semester was, like I said, I'm the person providing the rules of the game, so to speak. Here's the framework for the assignment. I provided what countries and case studies we were going to look at. So from the US 2016 all the way to Uganda 2021. But my role was really to organize them chronologically. And I pulled in some highlights, but the students then did all of the discussion amongst themselves. And what they were doing was actually, this isn't just, oh, I liked your presentation, but they were actually looking very, very, from a standpoint of, very, they were able to synthesize information and actually thread the needle between different case studies, which was my goal. Is in this case, the students were able to compare the situation in Myanmar to the previous wars in Rwanda, which was actually a really excellent way to tie this together. Looking at, and in this one, tying the situation also in Myanmar to Uganda, and looking at, the role of Russian-inspired disinformation to this. So, and I also pulled in at the end, some interesting news items that were occurring, but ultimately this was students actually taking what had happened during the previous 7 weeks and really synthesizing it very, very, very well. So I was happy that, my role here was just to amplify and organize, which was actually really great. So let's go back. So the elements here, as we went through the semester, by the time we got to, like I said, towards the end of the semester, I'm not actually providing any longer, kind of the slides and the lecture materials, because the students at this point, what they're getting from me is a mind map that navigates them through some of the readings that I've asked them to do, but the discussion and work is coming from them. So again, incorporating multi-modalities in terms of videos, data visualizations, looking at some reports, looking at peer-reviewed and academic works. But at this point in the semester, the students have really kind of taken this course on and the topic on as their own. So towards the end then of the semester, the last item in the course is called crowdsourcing, which is interesting because at this point the students have almost crowdsourced the course for themselves. So towards the end, we look at some of the ethical issues around crowdsourcing investigations, user generated intelligence, citizen led investigations, so to speak. But I've also, as part of the team building and alignment of incentives, I did, say, okay, let's see if we can get together. But I also brought together the students for an end of semester book prize. And I was very happy that Dr. Miller Idris had donated her a copy of Her Hate in the Homeland. But I wanted students to nominate a peer for this. And the nomination form really focused on someone who has gone above and beyond, and the questions were around team building. So throughout the course, like I said, this was about, group formation, group identity, but also, looking at ways in which students got away from, I'm only talking to the professor. And what was really interesting was there were so many really positive, so much positive feedback on that, that what I ended up actually doing was I had to get more, have even more awards. But one student did win the ICJ book prize. Again, that was really generous there. But based on the student feedback, I did have 4 other book awards that I called leadership prizes, because these were students who, based on their peers' reflections, so this is not the professor grading, had consistent value-added contributions to the course and peer success in mentorship, group leadership, and discussion board contributions and resources. So again, that towards the end of the course, we had really kind of embraced this as our methodology as well as ethos. So that was actually one of the success metrics for this course. So yes, 29 out of 30 students, I think, completed the course. All students received a B+ or better, and all students who were scheduled for graduation succeeded. 3 students who took this course last semester were directly employed in the subject area, disinformation, encountering violent extremism, within 3 months of finishing the course. There were no incomplete grades, despite a significant amount of work. Students mastered all learning objectives and the digital and technology competencies that were created for the course, and demonstrated what I thought were very significant data analysis competencies, both structured and unstructured data, regardless of their major. I mean, I would compare this with graduate level research and analysis skills. So 10 discussion boards and responses to group projects in OSINT and influence operations analysis, 1 midterm writing assignment of 10 pages, a final presentation, and a final research paper. So certainly, did not sacrifice any academic rigor in this. But what was most important for me was really the student engagement metric I set for myself, was really seeing the entirely peer-led and student-directed learning by week 8. From a faculty experience perspective, this also allowed me to do a backwards course conversion to duplicate this course for in-person delivery, which is what I'm doing here in fall 2021. So I want to sum up some of the questions that came up. So cost. The entire course was zero cost materials. So there really isn't a textbook for this. So there was zero cost there. The platform, Milanote, was free for the users. There was a subscription cost for me as a professor, but that's part of what I call, I consider my own disability tax. Being disabled is, I can tell you, very expensive in terms of peripherals and additional software. So I kind of eat that cost as part of my disability tax, but none of this was passed on to the students. Was there additional time for me compared to more traditional courses? I'll be honest with you, this was less time for me, with the exception of the, oh my goodness, capital Siege, got to redo the last part of the syllabus. Because again, given my disabilities, this is kind of how I approach information organization myself, but also, given my background in experience in information design, this would be a way I would approach stuff anyway. So actually, this was much less time than me facing a lot of barriers trying to use other enterprise platforms. Question around student digital literacy and user adoption. So in terms of, the student population, we call these digital natives. They are generally very digitally savvy, very fluent in multiple platforms, from Instagram to Twitter to Snapchat to Canva. These are people who are content creators. in their day-to-day world. Um, something that looks like TikTok is probably more familiar to them than, an enterprise platform. Also, in the way that information is shared, and memory is constructed in the online world, it's very different than perhaps kind of traditional hierarchical information and memory structures. So while they're at the same time, though, while they're digital natives, they don't necessarily have are coming with technology competencies around, what is the backbone behind artificial intelligence, or networking or database structures, how algorithms are created. So that part, in terms of data literacy, I provided to them as part of the course materials. But pivoting off, kind of their fluency was critical. Information literacy was a little bit different. So this, is kind of a different approach to, how do we debunk or not fall prey to disinformation and conspiracy theories. So part of this was, some of the skills they learned around open source intelligence, around visual sociology, around interpreting visual materials, but also giving them the skills to dismantle hate speech. So not necessarily something that somebody would know how to do, regardless of being a digital native. But it did allow us to really have a lot of discussions around how, just because something is online or it's computer-based doesn't mean that it is free of judgment, racism, and bias, especially around the data sets around artificial intelligence. So a lot of this was incorporated into the syllabus, again, assuming that, this was not going to be kind of a core competency they were coming into the course with. So in terms of user adoption, though, there was really no issues with user adoption of the platform. However, I did scaffold this, very bit by bit. So they were given ample warning before the semester that the course was going to be using an experimental platform. They were given access to it before the semester. They were given, a PowerPoint and training into, but the actual, and a lot of it was role modeling throughout. So watching me do things and then repeat. I did have a couple students requested, a little bit additional help one-on-one, not a big deal. That's what I'm here for. But overall, user adoption, because it was, in a sense, much more similar to, perhaps some of the platforms they're used to navigating visually, like TikTok or Instagram, user adoption was very high. Feedback, like I said, was there was a lot of peer feedback. I modeled to them how to do constructive feedback in the early portions of the course. My feedback to the teams and individuals was done in World. So I, gave, my focus was on amplification. A few times I did correct if there was, misinterpretation of a matter of law, but students were not penalized for that. And so I wanted them to see that if I'm jumping in and, providing some correction, that it didn't affect their grades, that was my role, was to kind of keep everybody going. But most of the time I was there to encourage and amplify. In terms of individual feedback and grades, there were clear rubrics for all of the assignments. and the individual feedback based on those rubrics was all done in Blackboard, obviously for student privacy and information security, and none of that was done publicly. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm thrilled to have had everybody in the live session as well as in the edited recorded session. As we said earlier, there's going to be many more opportunities to engage. There is coming up in fall 2021, we are launching faculty fellow office hours. So you'll be able to sign up with me using my Calendly link to do brainstorming, some spitballing, questions about incorporating experience, information design, innovation in online education. For those of you who are more interested in some of the research behind this, especially around artificial intelligence, please feel free to check out the public scholarship venue for the AI team at the Center for International Human Rights at our Medium link. There is going to be a LibGuide published very soon. So thank you to our librarian colleagues. That's actually going to have a lot of the resources, the open educational resources, as well as the databases, so that you can use these in your courses as well. And we do have our fall 2021 faculty seminar on innovation, experience, and information design with a focus on accessibility starting in a couple weeks. We will have additional faculty seminars in spring 2022 and summer 2022 along these themes. And you can expect as well, starting in a few weeks, additional online resources to be published on the TLC websites, as well as podcasts and videos throughout the year. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to collaborating with everyone in the coming year.